So a little bit about Penny Reynolds. I shared it a little bit, but she is actually one of the industry's leading voices in call center training and education. She co-founded the Call Center School, where she spent 15 years developing and teaching a wide range of educational programs. Now an independent consultant, she's a popular speaker at industry conferences and continues to write for many industry publications. Her articles have appeared in dozens of print publications and online resources. She's the author of numerous call center books, and she's also co-authored the series of textbooks used in the University of Phoenix call center management curriculum. She's an honors graduate of Vanderbilt University and one of the first recipients of the Call Center Magazine's prestigious Call Center Pioneer Award. And from what I hear, she's also an incredible gardener and pickleball player.
And that's actually what I spend more of my time doing these days than in the call center world. So thanks for that nice introduction, Jim. I'm delighted to be here with you today. As Jim mentioned, I spent many years heading up the call center school. Maggie Clanky and I actually sold it a few years ago, and we have mostly retired. But we still do some interesting projects that come our way. And when Jim contacted me about this, it was something I felt really strongly about. In all the years that we had the call center school, I think we saw the most impact and the most change from those folks that went through a call center supervisory curriculum. I absolutely believe that is where there's the most opportunity for education and the most opportunity for change and going in the right direction. You know, I think out there in the education part of contact centers, there's a lot of money spent on frontline training, and there should be, but without supervisors being equipped to lead and support and direct and coach, all that training in the world for the front line is not going to take hold. So when Jim told me he had taken over call center coach and this exciting curriculum, and I was like, oh, I'd love to get involved in some way. So I'm really happy to be here with you today to kind of talk about call center supervision and what's important. So with that, let's get started. So what we're going to talk about in today's program, I want to talk a little bit up front just about that really important role that the supervisor plays in the overall success of the center. We're going to talk about the attributes of a successful supervisor. So who makes a good one? What are the most important characteristics and qualities in order to look for the right people in these roles, and how we select them. Once we have the right people, we've got to equip them with the knowledge and skills that they need. So we're going to talk through 6 core competencies. So really in today's world, what should call center supervisors know and be able to do? And so we're going to review those. And I like the way that Jim and company have categorized all these competencies. You can see it organized many different ways, but I really like what they've done here. And so we're going to review those competencies, and Jim's going to go over a little bit of that with you in terms of how call center coach supplies those. And then I'm going to be adding my 2 cents in on all that as well. And then at the end, you'll hear some more about call center coach and how they can help supply this training and curriculum. Okay, I want to start by just talking about how important this call center supervisor is. One of the key issues, it has been ever since I've been in the call center world, is just getting and keeping good people to handle customer contacts. And so for so many organizations, turnover is still there. It's growing. Finding and keeping good people is just tough. And I just want to read you a few statistics here that I found. One of these was a study from the Saratoga Institute. This was with 20,000 workers who had just left an employer, and many of these were in that call center administrative type of role. That study revealed that the supervisor's behavior was the '1 reason that people left. Another study found that 50% of work satisfaction is determined by that supervisor-employee relationship. And then there was a 25-year-long study done by the Gallup organization interviews with over 12 million workers at 7,000 different companies. So a huge comprehensive survey about turnover and attrition and what's going on there. That study found that the relationship with one's direct supervisor was the largest factor in determining how long an employee was likely to stay. So it's huge. So this important one-to-one role and one-to-one relationship is one of the most critical things that can happen. That is supported by, if you look at statistics from our industry, and this was a couple of years back. I don't think things have changed that much, but a poll of 1,000 different people in the contact center industry looking for contact center positions showed that the reason they had left their previous job in the call center industry were these reasons on screen here. And if you look, it's kind of small type on here, but the big block there, the red one, says that 24% say that they're being unfairly paid. So, okay, when some people leave jobs, there is, in some cases, a compensation issue. Okay, that's one of those things that we kind of refer to as a hygiene factor. If it's there, you don't notice it so much, but when it's not right, it becomes a problem. So that is certainly one area. But that's a quarter of the pie. Look at the rest of those pieces. 27% said lack of promotional opportunities. 20% said their hard work was going unrecognized. 18% were feeling bored or unchallenged. 11% feeling undertrained. If you look at those other pieces of the pie, most of those things are directly attributable to the supervisor and how they interact and how they manage their team members. So if you look at why people are leaving, yes, compensation is part of it, but so much of it is they're not getting the reward and recognition, they're not being challenged, they're not being developed, and so on and so on. So that's a huge reason why people are leaving. And who's responsible for that? The direct supervisors. I think it's also interesting to look at why people stay. So we don't always want to look at the negative side. So when you do similar studies of people that are in this position, they're in the job and they're doing it well and they're happy, they come to work every day and things just work. Why are they staying? If you look at this list, you're not seeing compensation on the list. Many people that are finding fulfillment and they like working in contact centers, in many cases, it's not because, oh my God, they're making so much money that couldn't possibly dream of doing anything else. So money is there, but it's not the most rewarding thing about why I like this job, why I'm staying, why they stay. It's, I'm good doing this kind of work. I like doing this. Motivation and job fit, the number one reason people leave, the number one reason they stay. So that's one reason it's really important that we also spend a lot of time getting the right people in the role in the first place. We can save ourselves a lot of time and money and everything down the road if we get that part right. And that's true for the frontline agents. It's also true for supervisors. We're going to talk about that in just a minute. But again, why they stay, they feel empowered. They're getting trained. They're getting developed. There's a career path. They're getting recognized for their work. And look at that list. Who's responsible for doing these things? The frontline supervisor. So we've got to make sure that we're getting these people and equipping them. Another survey that I like, and then I'll get off the survey thing, but another survey, and I thought this was really interesting because in all the work I've done over the years, when I go in and talk to supervisors and you look at the teams and what's going on, and everyone's got some issues with some performance with some employees, but I think these statistics hold so true. This survey said only 23% of employees report that they perform to their full potential. So basically you've got 1 out of 4 giving it everything they've got every day, coming in and just doing great work. Don't you wish it was more than 23%? Some of you out there are thinking like, I wish I had 23% giving it everything. But so 1 out of 4, 68%. So 2 out of 3 said they could increase effectiveness significantly if they wanted to. 44% do what is required, so they're not in trouble, really, but nothing special either. And to me, that just sort of illustrates what many teams are like in today's call center. So if you in the audience out there, you're a supervisor, how does this match up to your team? hopefully you've got a couple of, stars, superstars. They're doing great work, and wish you had more of them. But 2/3, there's room for improvement. And maybe, close to half are just, it's in them. They're getting by, so they're not, they're on that little borderline. They're not really in trouble, but we know there's more. So what we're really looking for is that discretionary effort, what they could give you if they wanted to, but it's beyond what is absolutely expected. So for me, that kind of says it all. I think that's what supervisor's role is to get that, not just here's enough to get by, but to get that discretionary effort out of those employees, in terms of the call center success and in terms, honestly, of the success of those individuals. So we said that's on the shoulders of supervisory staff. So, let me ask you this. What percentage of your folks are coming up into these positions in your center because they were good on the phones? Okay. In most centers, and it varies quite a bit, there's all kinds of statistics, but the majority of supervisors are typically promoted from the frontline agent position. And I think that's great. I think that's it's a good, worthwhile career path, absolutely. But, and maybe you have this in your own center, do you think sometimes we're promoting the wrong people into those positions? Just because someone was good on the phones and they were good at actually doing the work, does that necessarily mean they're going to be good at helping others do the work? So it's often a mistake that we make of taking our very best agents and automatically those are the ones that move up the ladder and move into these positions. It's not to say that none of them should be promoted into these positions, but in many cases you've got star performers who are great individual performers, and we need to leave them being great individual performers. That's where they actually find satisfaction and will do a good job. Maybe not cut out to be supervisory staff. So first we've got to think about, are we selecting the right people to be supervisors? And then we've got to ask ourselves, are we equipping them with the right knowledge and skills to be successful in this job? So let's just talk just for a moment about getting those people. So how do you go about that right now? And Jim, I don't know, is our chat enabled so we can see if someone, if you can tell them, it's the first time I've used this this platform. If anyone wants to just chat in, use the chat and tell us what percent of supervisors in your center are promoted up from frontline positions. So if we can figure out how to do that chat, I'll keep talking. But Jim, if there's something you need to enable out there in the control panel, I don't know.
I'm monitoring this right now.
Okay. But let's talk about how do you find those people? One is you typically look at who's good at doing the job. Okay. Perhaps you interview these people. In many cases, putting them in role plays, behavioral-based interviews and role plays of going through and putting them in situations to see how they would review someone's performance and coach in a certain situation, how they deal with a difficult employee problem and situation. So role plays are good. Giving them tests and giving them psychometric tests. I'm a huge fan of psychometric testing. I think it's one of the most valuable things we can do, number one, to make sure that we're getting the right people in those frontline positions. It is often not a factor of can they do the work? So we give them all of these tests that show what their skills are and how fast can they type and are they, good communication skills and those things. Those things are important. But what's equally important is, do they have the right personality fit for this kind of work? And just like we would do psychometric testing to find that and hopefully make better and better selections for the frontline staff, we also need to be doing that for the supervisory staff. There are some people that are just honestly not cut out for this. And so I believe on the next slide, we've got some attributes of top supervisors. So what I want you to do is I want you to take a look at that list and pick which two you think are the most important factors of someone being successful as a call center supervisor.
And while people are doing that, Penny, to share with you, I mean, I've gotten a 50%, 100%, 100%, 25%.
Okay.
Somebody said that they mostly promote executives. So that, I mean, I was like, wow, I mean, where did they start though?
Yeah.
Did they start on the front line?
Okay. So our audience confirms that the majority are coming from the front line. Okay. So we've got that career path, and that's good. But then as you look at this list, everybody out there, what do you think would be the top two things? And when I ask this, I usually get the answers of, you need to be a people person, a good communicator. Those two at the top are always, big vote getters here. But I have to tell you that when you look at these attributes and then you test, and what the two most important things are is the desire to manage, and that next to the last one down there, someone who enjoys seeing others succeed. And that's sometimes where you can identify that person, that they're a great individual performer, but they just don't want to manage other people. And honestly, they get more satisfaction out of their own success rather than helping others do it. And, I'm just going to be honest with you here. I have been a supervisor in my career in many jobs, and I was pretty good at it. Not great at it, though. Honestly, I really don't think so, because I'm one of those people that I like to do things on my own. I like to do my projects, and I tend to kind of hover and manage. And, I think maybe I could do that better, and so on. And so when Maggie and I started the call center school, from the very beginning, I headed up all the curriculum development and all of that kind of, those kinds of tasks. And she agreed she'd be the people manager and deal with all those issues. And it worked out great for us because we both knew our strengths and what we liked doing and what we really, frankly, we could do, but we really weren't going to be good at it and find satisfaction with it. So I think, sometimes as maybe you're considering taking on that next role and being a manager or leader of, groups of people, I think you have to ask yourself, are you going to find happiness and satisfaction in that? Or, are you a better individual performer? And is there another way that you can, find success? So it's an important sort of self-realization, I think. But these psychometric tests will get at that and show you and bring out these sorts of attributes. So I'm a big fan of that kind of testing.
Yeah, and so Penny, I mean, to jump on with that, I'm actually certified in emotional intelligence through MHS International out of Canada. And what you're saying is exactly right. Unfortunately, for a lot of the frontline supervisor level types of roles, organizations don't invest in those types of tools in order to be able to get to that insight. But I totally agree with you. If you could do it, absolutely do it.
Yeah. It's not, it's not free. There's a cost to it, but I'm a big believer that by doing it, and again, if you're starting by doing it with the frontline staff, and so you've already got some information about them there and understand those personality attributes, but you want to look at the profile of who's an ideal employee from the front line, and have existing employees take the test and sort of come up with what's the profile, what are the commonalities of someone that's successful here, and look for that as you bring new people in and test. It can save so much money in the long run in terms of turnover and problem employees and discipline and all those kinds of things. So I'm a big believer that it does pay for itself. And I think the same thing is true at the supervisory level. So number one, we've got to find the right people first. We've got to select the right people. And then once they're in those positions, I think one of the biggest problems I see is that we throw them into those positions. They've worked here several years. They know how to do the work. All they now need is just, some training from HR over, what to say and not say to an employee, how to do a job review, those do's and don'ts, and there you go. And we sort of just leave them floundering out there. So very important, I think, that there's a very defined path and a defined curriculum, and it involves so many different things. So as I said, throughout my years, I've done supervisory training and developed, seminars and programs. But in talking to Jim and taking a look at what Call Center Coach is doing, I think it's really well organized in terms of these 6 areas. So I think what we're going to do here is kind of have a little back and forth. And Jim, if you'll tell us a little bit about each of these 6, and I'll just leave this up here and let you just get on to the next slide and whatever. And then I'd like to add some commentary as you go through as well.
I appreciate that, Penny. And, as you were talking and I was thinking about this and preparing for this, I'm like, I can sit here and essentially talk about each one of these. However, I think the titles themselves, are somewhat self-explanatory. And then when you get down into the details as far as the actual skills that you need in order to be competent in those areas, I mean, heck, we could, that's where we can spend months, going through every single one of those particular attributes. However, I think for me, you even mentioned it yourself where you said you used to be a frontline supervisor. Well, so was I. And so for me, like many other people and literally everybody I talk to that is beyond that supervisor level, I, ask them about how they actually, became one and moved on from that. And everybody I talked to is like, well, I was a good agent. And then they told me I was, I either applied or I was told I'm just now going to supervise all these agents. And when you start looking at the skill sets needed to be an agent, and you kind of talked about the whole technical aspects, hey, I'm good at doing this. I know it needs to be done. But when you move to the position of having to actually lead the people who are the technicians, mm-hmm. It's a totally different skill set. And so for me, when I was told, hey, you're going to manage these people, just tell them and show them what you know and things will be great. That I found out rather rapidly that was not the case. Mm-hmm. And so I struggled like so many do. And the fact is that the supervisor failure rate is like greater than 50%. Mm-hmm. And if you stop and think about our industry, well, what typically happens in that failure process or that crawling process till they actually get to the point to where they can move or dog paddle and swim, sink or swim, is that they take out a lot of agents along with them in the process. I mean, it's what happened.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a catastrophe happening, ongoing. And I even have interviewed some people on the Fast Leader Show who've gone through that path. And, somebody even talked about their first foray as a supervisor and how dismal it was. And so there's some statistics by other companies that we have available that'll be in your bonus material that will share that with you and talks about why they fail and things along those lines. But for me, I mean, it took me forever to realize that I had to build skills in these competencies. And I just didn't know it. I didn't have a framework. I didn't have a pathway. So I just struggled to find my way. I'm one of those people who, seeks, out the knowledge that I have to. I fortunately, when I first started in the call center industry, I mean, we're talking back in the 90s, is that I found one association that was out there, and that was CCNG at the time was called Call Center Network Group. And so I started getting involved with them, and it really helped boom my skills and knowledge by really talking to others. I still had no path. And so when I had the opportunity to move up, I started a development program for emerging leaders, and we referred to it as a team leader and training program. And essentially what we had done is created the ability for them to build skills in these 6 core areas. And so then we found people who had potential, and we essentially started grooming them to be a supervisor, because we didn't want to get stuck in the position to say, oh my gosh, we need 3 supervisors. Where are we going to get them from? And then going back to that whole issue you were talking about is, are we finding the right candidates? And I mean, just, it creates a lot of, anxiety and issues and risk. And go ahead. You were going to say something?
Well, I was just saying, what I have seen through the years is that when someone moves into this role, like I said earlier, what exists in many organizations is some kind of leadership program. But I would argue that there are many things in those programs that HR probably provides that are very good, very useful. But there are so many things about being a leader and being a supervisor in the contact center world that are different than being a supervisor over in the accounting department or anywhere else. So those are some of the things that HR has no idea what these nuances are, what makes a call center run, and these performance, is there any other place in the business where, we watch someone so carefully? We know how many calls and how long and when they logged off for break and that kind of, just that whole nature of the work and someone having to supervise and coach and helping people understand why those things are important and just coaching the quality of the work, task by task by task that they're doing. So there's so many things that are not covered in most HR leadership development programs. I have no idea. So that's why I think it's so important to have this call center supervisory program developed.
Yeah, you're exactly right. And so I even had one of my members, a call center coach, who just became certified because this success path in becoming and building skills, I guess you'd say, in these particular areas, at least the knowledge part, because there's a whole difference between knowing and doing, and that's part of what we address at Call Center Coach too. But she said, I've been a supervisor for almost 20 years. She goes, and I learned so much about what I didn't know, just by trying to gain more information and insight into these 6 core competencies. So, it isn't a scenario where we're only talking about people who are brand new to the role. We have to be lifelong learners in our industry, especially with the rapid pace of change that we've experienced over just the past 3 years.
Yeah, it's funny you say that. We're talking about this as if it's a program for brand new supervisors, but much of the content here is totally applicable to someone that's been a call center supervisor for 10 years, 15 years. It's funny when I used to go out and do these classes live, and first thing around the room is let's get acquainted. And how long have you been with the company? How long have you been in the call center? How long have you been a supervisor? And you could see some of the supervisors saying, well, I've been here, 25 years. And I've been a supervisor for 10 of that. I'm thinking I don't know what you think you're going to teach me about being a supervisor. But they end up leaving those sessions wow, they were so excited, a whole new way of thinking about things and a whole new model to follow, and couldn't wait to try some of these things. And then there were some people who are they're not having any of it, of course, but most just find that, wow, gosh, I wish I had known this 10 years ago when I started out. So it's such a good thing if you can move directly into one of these programs as you take on that job. But even if you've been doing this 5 years, 10 years or more, there's value in filling in the gaps.
Most definitely. So as far as the slides are concerned, if you want to go ahead and advance so that way I can still monitor chat, that would be great.
Okay. Well, let's see. I'm going to go back. I just want to touch on each one of these,
Sure.
Not to read all these bullet points or anything, but just for me, some of these I think are really critical. And for me, the staff development one, I think, is where the rubber hits the road. I think this is all about helping that team member get better. So it's no longer about doing the work. It's helping someone else do the work and be better at it. So what I understand there to be in your staff development competencies and training programs are things that will help define the position, to help supervisors figure out who should be selected to be in that frontline position. And what is really critical, I think, and I think the most important part of a supervisor's job is doing coaching. And what that involves is, performance management as a big umbrella term, but looking at performance, reviewing it to see, is it what we need and want? If not, why are they not performing? And then what's the diagnosis? How do we address the issue? How do we coach and keep moving people forward? Back to that, getting that discretionary effort out of someone. So for me, this is the biggest part of, in many cases, it's the biggest gap and the biggest weakness. It's the most important thing I think that supervisors do. So if there's only one area, it's this one right here. And it comes down to that, coaching. What happens is if there's not this performance management model in place, and you hear that I'm saying performance management, not people management. you hear some people saying, well, they're just this great people person, a people manager. You're not really managing people, honestly. You're managing the performance of those people. And managing personalities is not something we want to touch on, honestly. It's, that takes years of psychiatry expertise and all those things. What supervisors need to understand is they're managing the performance of those people. And that is a science and a model that can absolutely be learned. And so it involves defining what we want performance to look like. It's reviewing performance. It's saying, is what we're getting what we want? If not, what's the gap? Why are they not performing? Figuring that out, doing a diagnosis of root cause, and then figuring out the coaching process. And I think sometimes, especially when you have new supervisors, they don't really understand what they're meant to do in a coaching session. And the answer is, it depends. It depends upon that person. You may have a brand new person who honestly is still kind of in training. So a supervisor's role there is really more of an instructor, an extension of the training department. So you're still teaching skills, you're providing knowledge. As those team members grow and evolve, you're fine-tuning those things, but the role changes from one of a trainer to more of a coach, and let's fine-tune. You're good at this, but we need to work on this area. And then there's at some point, and I think it's what's tough for a lot of supervisors, is they have people that can actually do the work better than they could do it. So what is the supervisor's role at that point? Well, it's still to help that employee keep growing and evolving. So, understanding motivational techniques and creating career paths for those people where there may only be one open supervisory position, but helping that person continue to grow and do well in the job and develop their skills. So I think this is the most important role a supervisor has, is staff development, and that whole, how to coach, not just, okay, let's listen to a call and here's what you did well and here's what you did wrong. It's way beyond that. So understanding behaviors and how to, I was a psychology major in college. So it's behavioral reinforcement. And so understanding what you're trying to change and steps to get there. So results orientation, I think this is important. And for me, this kind of bleeds into the communications piece too, but understanding what is the company trying to accomplish? What is the call center meant to be doing in terms of serving the organization? And then, so what means success in terms of the call center? So what are the numbers? What are the customer satisfaction ratings? What are sales results? I mean, what's expected overall from this call center? And then how does that roll down to, so what is expected from each team and all the way down to each individual? So part of it is helping individual team members understand what their role is in the great big picture. And it's a really important role. But once again, when those results aren't happening and those behaviors aren't there, it's understanding how to break that down. And it kind of goes back to that coaching again. So sometimes when I see results orientation, one of the coaching problems I see is that you have supervisors coaching to a number, coaching to a schedule adherence percentage, or coaching to an average handle time goal, or a quality score, whatever, coaching to a number, which I think is a huge mistake. But it's breaking down that result that we want. We still want that AHG. We still want that customer satisfaction score, that schedule adherence number. But breaking that down, not coaching to numbers, but breaking that down into the behaviors that need to happen and getting those results. So it also is very much tied up in coaching. Jump in anytime here, Jim. You want, these are your comments.
Well, I mean, and you're doing fantastic. I mean, with someone with your background and skill, I mean, this is not foreign territory for you. One of the things that I would add, though, is because someone actually kind of brought it up, asking about, does it matter whether they're, outbound sales or inbound service? And the fact is that what we're talking about here doesn't matter. Your set of metrics differ. However, the whole people performance aspect, and all that management part, doesn't change. So you lead people, you manage processes and procedures and things like that. And so the leading people part is really what is, can be taken from one contact center operation to another, regardless, inbound, outbound, blended, digital only. It just doesn't matter.
Yeah, and in terms of doesn't matter inbound sales, outbound. Again, the performance management pieces are pretty much the same. Now, I'm a believer in that the supervisors do need to know and be able to do what the agents are doing to a large extent. So in the sense that they are likely somewhere along the escalation path of a call has gone wrong or this has happened. So I think they have to be the best at doing some of these things. So demonstrating call handling practices that are, going to provide customer satisfaction. Helping people understand active listening, whether it's in a sales environment or service or handling difficult calls. But like I said earlier, how much of that is needed? Much of that may be needed if you have a team of brand new employees where they're still kind of just in this training mode still. And so you may find that a supervisor's time is demonstrating, is taking those calls, is describing and showing here's how it looks when done right, and then helping coach that person. So I think part of what supervisors need to know is they need to be able to really understand and do the work. There will come a time, however, when the agents are better at doing the work than the supervisors, and then the coaching role becomes different. But I think at least early on, you have to have these things as well. So being, top notch at delivering good service and the right steps of a call and the sales process and so on, that has to be in place too. Which is why it is one of the benefits. If you do promote up from the agent ranks, you're probably good at doing these things. So some of these things, okay, you can check that box. If you're bringing in supervisors from another area, you may have different boxes checked. They may already be good at coaching or whatever. They may have no idea how to do exactly what your agents are doing. So, there's advantages and disadvantages of hire from within versus hire some experience from the outside world. Let's see what else is in your 6 competencies. So communications and change management. I think this is critical. Understanding how to communicate both one-on-one, how to really sit down and do a coaching session, which I think most supervisors, at least new supervisors, feel like they need to prepare and sit down and tell. And understanding that it's half that, but it's half or more than half, hopefully listening. So understanding the communications process, how to vary communication styles based on that kind of individual and the situation at hand. So just like a trainer understands people's learning styles, there will be some of that as supervisors understand how to coach. Some people are very visual and they need to see something laid out and a plan on paper, and others don't need that so much. They've got to hear it perhaps several times, and others are not going to get it until it's all hands-on and we're doing something together. So understanding those learning and communication styles and how to apply them to different individuals and how to use different communication styles if you are perhaps sharing good news and praise versus some constructive criticism or disciplinary kinds of things. So, and then the other one that I've noticed is in your competencies here is change management. And, you really can't be without it these days. I mean, nobody's just standing still. And so you may have some employees that are just gung-ho and love change and what new stuff are we going to be doing today? But you got a whole lot of people out there like, they didn't sign up for that. So understanding how to bring people along is a really crucial piece these days, especially.
Yeah, and just to add on to that, so we have an advisory board at Call Center Coach, and they went through and looked at all of the things that we were doing from competency base and all of that, and when right before, we actually did our last update, they were like, oh, you got to have this change management, and so we, really added all of the different aspects of change management into this competency in order to address what you're just talking about. I mean, we have to have it these days.
Yeah. I think change management is one of those things that tends to be in leadership development programs, maybe from the HR department, but nothing drives it home like applying change management techniques in general to the call center problems that you're going to be facing. And so, making it real. Okay. Collaborative relationships. When I think about this and what do supervisors need to know and be able to do, part of that is creating teams that work. And you will probably, in the HR leadership development program, have classes on teams and diversity and those sorts of things. And you're wanting to create this environment that's inclusive and embracing diversity, but you're wanting to marry these people up to get the results that you need. So understanding how to embrace the different strengths and weaknesses and people working together is a huge part. So understanding sort of team dynamics and how to structure that and how to define what the team's roles and purpose and all of that and who's going to do what. And that's a very important part here. And I think part of establishing that team culture, what you see in most call centers are team competitions and team activities and so on. But there's some science to that as well. Of you walk into some centers and some supervisors are just much better at it. Sometimes it just happens that the personalities of the team just meld and they're great together. Sometimes not so much. But man, you can just feel it when you're visiting in a center of those teams that are cohesive and working well, and they just seem to want to come in and come to work every day. So how do you make that happen? So I think that's an important skill, capability for supervisors to understand sort of the dynamics and how to make that work. And then we have business acumen. Now, and this for me is a huge area because I view this as supervisors really need to understand the ins and outs of the business and the ins and outs of call center operations. So understanding like the top 20 key performance indicators, what is handle time, what is occupancy, what is shrinkage, understanding all of those measures and what they mean and how what they do, what their team members do can impact those numbers. So understanding the not just, there's a accounting department that deals with budgets or whatever, but understanding the call center's operating budget and how turnover can impact that, how decisions they make about schedule adherence, or how all of that impacts the bottom line. And, throughout my many years, one of the areas we were really known for was training and workforce management. So I always feel like that's one of the most important things. But supervisors don't need to understand forecasting models and how to break down data and do all that. But they absolutely need to understand the process. Where did that schedule come from? Why does it make a difference whether someone's in their seat 15 minutes earlier or later? What is the power of one? What is the impact of just a person or two not being in their seat on time? And so while the workforce management team can define that and do the little session during new hire training, it's ongoing. I actually wrote a little book about a supervisor's guide to workforce management. And we're happy to provide some of those through Jim. But I think it's really important because it's up to them on a day-to-day basis to monitor that, to help them understand the relevancy of it, and to coach for that, among many other things. But when I look at business acumen, it's like, okay, yes, supervisors need to understand the overall operations of the center, and with a big focus of that, I think, being the workforce management piece. So just my 2 cents.
Especially where we're in such a environment where metrics are so important. I mean, I think the contact center metrics were more important than other places of the business. Going back and looking at my career,
there's no other area that just measures everything all the time, every second of the day. There's no other place like it. So if you've been a supervisor in another part of the company, you come into the call center, it's like, what are all these reports? Yeah.
And it's our own language too. I mean, it doesn't translate into others. And I think one of the things that also is difficult when you start talking about this whole business acumen piece is that that first part where it's being able to translate everything. So when you say that at this executive level, this is the focus. Well, that's how this particular metric that we're looking at here that's on our, in our KPIs and a part of our scorecard, That's how that connects, because otherwise we don't see that visibly. I mean, and a supervisor being able to know how all of that fits and being able to convey it to their people, what it then does, it gives that frontline person to know what their reason is.
Yeah, the why. Understanding the why. Yeah. Okay, so that was kind of a quick look at, what do they need to know and be able to do. So, Jim, this naturally brings us to, how do you go about helping people get on this path?
Well, I think one of the things that we kind of, without coming out right and stating it, is that when you start thinking about developing these skills, it's not an event. Especially when you start looking at the traditional ways that we typically go about, trying to train people is, hey, let's put them in a room, for a couple days, let's lock them in and then give them all this information. Well, once you walk out of those doors, it doesn't mean that you're going to be a better leader of people. That's just not the way it works. And so when you look at some of the research that's been done on how you develop somebody's skills and competencies such as these, it's really a journey. It's a pathway. It's a framework that is needed. And when we start talking about the way that people that the people who study adults and how they learn and how they retain and how they improve their skills, it cannot just be here's a bunch of things that you need to do and watch all these digital videos and things like that, and then you'll be done. No, there's a very big difference, like I had mentioned, of the knowing and the doing. And the knowing and the doing isn't instantly transferable. Doesn't mean that I walk into a room and boom, aha, I now have lights. That's not the way supervisor skills are developed. It takes time. So when you start looking at the progression and how that happens, it happens over time using different types of learning. And so when you look at the learning, it comes in a lot of different ways. And one of the things that we often forget to realize is that as adults, we actually learn the most when we're actually in a community with others that are going through some similar things. Others who've been there, others who are going through it, others who haven't been there yet. And by that sharing of perspectives and insight, like go back to Matthias, who was one of the folks who commented on where do your supervisors come from. Well, he's actually from South America, and they call their frontline phone agents executives. I was like, oh, well, thanks for that clarity. So when I had never heard that before. So now I have that perspective that I didn't have once before, because we're in community through this webinar. And that's how we learn as adults. But we also need learning when we need it. So on time, on point, to the point, and not have to go through, a couple-day workshop in order to be able to get that information. And so when you start looking at the research associated with what are people doing in order to gain skills in some of these competencies, they're essentially Googling it. They're trying to look it up when they need it. Their company may or may not have that information, or it's difficult to find. And then also, what happens when you Google something and you get, 11.5 million results back. What does it apply to you? Is it general, generic? So, having access to quick tips. We also do weekly Q&As where each week people can bring any question they want on a webinar. And you were talking about business acumen, and a couple of those things associated with business acumen were on this week's Q&A Tuesdays webinar, which is, of course, on Tuesday. And we also have challenge courses, which we call them boot camps, where going back from that knowing to doing, it's, okay, go do this today. And this is why you're doing it. And so that way it helps us build new habits, because when we talk about behaviors, leadership behaviors, it's not about knowing, it's about doing. And so boot camps or challenge courses was what they're called by other organizations, and enables people to do something different that they wouldn't otherwise do. And guess what? I get to learn and talk about it within that community. So, hey, what did you do? Right? Oh, hey, that's cool. I never thought about that. Because when you start thinking about us as human beings, as adults, how we go about our decision-making process, the way that that happens is that our brain goes and tries to search things that we are familiar with. Because if we're not familiar with it, it's not going to find anything. I mean, that's just the way it is. And so then we go searching. So if I can refer back to something that I've done and it worked well for me, hey, that's great. But if I don't have that, being able to refer back to what somebody else has done is the next best thing. And so also having things like this, like a mastermind webinar where you have people who've had some of the deep, rich wisdom and experience, like a Penny, come and talk to us about her perspectives and share things that, you know, we otherwise wouldn't have known. So those industry insights are key. And then also evaluating yourself within these core competencies and then leading to certification. So, hey, you know it, but again, it's still about doing. So you need a pathway and a framework, and that's how we actually develop these skills over time. So you really have to be able to line up all the elements that you need in order to be successful. I mean, it isn't just, hey, I read a book. Hey, I watched a movie. Hey, I sat in a class. You need something to be able to attach it to know why you're actually going in that particular direction and doing what you're doing. And this is what I did not have when I was given my first supervisor role. And it took me a while to kind of figure out the path. And needless to say, I spun around and fell down quite a bit in the process. And you talked about one of those key attributes of leaders. And while I say I'm practicing being a leader because I'm learning something new every day and I make mistakes every day, is that I love helping people. And I love helping people be successful. And so, I've been podcasting for a couple of years on the Fast Leader Show, and I have like over 200 episodes. And I don't talk about and highlight, me and the things that I've done. My guests, we talk about them because I like helping people and putting the spotlight on people. And that's why I'm so excited about what we're doing at Call Center Coach, because that frontline leader has someone who has been, you could just say, neglected for decades. And yet we wonder why we have turnover and morale problems. Duh. It's time to fix it. So I'm now going to try to share with you some bonus materials. So we do have a supervisor team audit where you can actually evaluate everybody, and that's a big audit to go through. But we also have a 20 questions assessment that you can get more information on. Information from this particular presentation in a condensed form in a cheat sheet, an infographic, as well as some other data and statistics associated with frontline supervisors and how to make them more successful. And so let me try to make that available to you right now for download. I'm going to do that. Hold on. I've shared that with you right now. You should be able to see that replace the information on your particular chat window, and I'll give you a few moments to download that. In addition, you'll be able to get this as well if you have any issues with downloading it by going into the private Facebook community. And as soon as we get done here, I'm going to go in there and I'll post it in there. And you can just ask to get into the Facebook community. I have it queued up as one of my browser windows, and I'll let you in right away. However, you still have the opportunity to ask a few more questions. We have a little bit more time left. And I'm going to stop the file sharing right now, go back to the chat. And somebody asked about the name of my podcast. It's The Fast Leader Show. It's at fastleader.net. And I'll definitely share that with you as well directly, Matthias, because I have your information. So Mike says, you nailed it. It's been said that you don't know about raising children until you have a kid. And that call center management is the same. Until you've done it, you can't manage it. That's so true. So the presentation, we will make that available to you as well. What other questions do we have? Penny, I want to thank you. Do you have any questions about what I went through at this very tail end point? Because I want to make sure those get addressed as well.
No, Jim, I think that's great. And like I said, I'm so impressed with the depth and the breadth of what you're offering. And I absolutely agree. Having done supervisor training for many, many years, while I would love to go out and, stand for 2 days and interact and do that classroom training. And, I miss it actually. But yeah, I think you're right. Getting training that way, and then you've been away from the center for a couple of days, and you're back, and your notebook goes on the shelf, and you're immersed again. And maybe you retain a few little things. So I truly believe that getting the knowledge in these little smaller pieces, and then getting to apply it in so many ways, and then getting to talk to others doing the same thing and having the same struggles, and that is the approach. That is all the different pieces, all the different kinds of learning, I think are critical. And some people are going to like one kind better than another and focus more on that, and others will like the chatting online. Others are going to just like, give me my digital thing and I want to read this. And I think there's something for everyone here. So it's an impressive curriculum.
Thank you. And then you bring up a really good point, because the classroom does have its place, and it is totally appropriate for certain types of learning. However, when you start looking at things like we're talking about here that we need to learn as leading in in a contact center, is that a lot of it is within your workflow. It's things that are happening, within the day, and things that come about. And so classroom is totally appropriate. However, this is an element, and going in a virtual environment, in a virtual way, gives you the opportunity to have perspectives that you just can't get from a four-walled classroom. Just the way it is. Thanks again, Penny. I appreciate it, and we'll talk.